I never expected a home-cooked meal to feel like a trap. The smell of rosemary chicken and garlic bread wafted through the kitchen of my parents' suburban house. Once my childhood home, now just a place I visited out of obligation, I sat at the table opposite my parents, Carol and Daniel, and across from my twin sisters, Tina and Lena, who looked far too pleased with themselves. It should have been just another quiet family dinner. But there was a tension in the air I couldn't place. I'd barely picked up my fork when Carol folded her hands and gave me the look, you know, the one serious but rehearsed, like she'd been practicing in the mirror. "Ethan, we want to talk to you about something important," she said. I glanced at my father. He was staring at his glass of water like it might hold the answers to a question he didn't want to ask. Then he said it. "We finalized our will." I paused fork, mid-air, heart tapping once loud and slow. Tina leaned back in her chair, arms crossed and smug. Lena followed up without missing a beat. "Everything's going to us," she said as casually as someone commenting on the weather. I blinked, "Excuse me." "The house," Tina said. "The beach condo, savings, everything." My first instinct was disbelief. Surely this was a joke in poor taste. But my mother gave a small, tight nod. "You have your own life, Ethan. A stable job. You don't need anything from us. Your sisters, they're still finding their way." I'd heard that phrase before. Finding their way. It was the family's euphemism for can't hold a job, spend money they don't have, and somehow still get praised for being creative. I didn't say anything right away. I just stared at them. My family trying to reconcile the years of financial support I'd provided with the blank indifference on their faces. Now I'd helped pay off this very mortgage. Covered my father's medical bills. Lent my sisters thousands they never repaid. But in this moment, none of that seemed to matter. "After everything I've done," I said quietly, "this is how it ends." Carol didn't flinch. "It's not about what you've done, it's about what they need." That was the moment I realized something vital. This wasn't about fairness. It never had been. Tina chuckled under her breath. "Don't be dramatic, Ethan. No one asked you to help. You just liked playing the savior," Lena added with a smirk. "Thought maybe if you bought enough goodwill, they'd finally love you the way they love us." I looked back at my parents. They said nothing. No denial, no protest, just silence. And in that silence, I found my clarity. I pushed back from the table, my chair scraping the floor louder than I intended. My voice came out level, but every syllable burned. "If that's your decision, then here's mine. Don't expect another dollar from me. Not for the house, not for the bills, not for them." Then I walked out. No one called after me. Not one word. The front door closed behind me like a seal locking the past away. What I didn't know, what none of them knew, was that this dinner would be the beginning of something none of us could undo. I didn't go home angry that night, not exactly. What I felt was sharper, quieter, like cold metal against skin. It wasn't rage, it was recognition. Back at my apartment, I didn't turn on the lights. I just sank into the couch, letting the city's glow leak through the windows. My phone buzzed on the table. Notifications from Tina, probably Lena too. I didn't check. Whatever they had to say, I'd already heard it, just dressed up differently. Instead, I opened my banking app. For years, I'd been quietly siphoning off thousands each month. $1,900 to my parents for their mortgage, another $1,200 split between Tina's tuition detours and Lena's influencer dreams. They never asked how it affected me. They only asked when the next payment was due. Staring at the numbers, I realized how much of my life had been spent cushioning theirs. I hovered over the automatic transfer settings. A few clicks, that's all it would take. 1 second, 2, then I pressed cancel. A tiny pop-up appeared. Recurring payment successfully stopped. That was it. No fireworks, no applause, just silence. And something I hadn't felt in years. Relief. It's strange how quiet freedom can be. The next morning, my phone lit up at 8:07 a.m. sharp. "Ethan, did you cancel the mortgage payment?" Carol's voice had the tone of someone trying to sound calm, but bleeding panic between the syllables. "Yes," I replied simply. because I realized I don't have to do this anymore. Silence. Then Ethan family supports each other. I almost laughed. Family uses each other. At least this one does. I was your safety net, not your son. Her breath caught. That's not fair. I leaned back in my chair. What wasn't fair was paying your bills while being told I didn't need anything. What wasn't fair was being cut out of your life's legacy while I carried your life's debt. She tried one last shot. You're being selfish. I finally am, I said. And I'm okay with that. Then I hung up. Over the next 48 hours, the guilt offensive began. Texts from Lena, dripping with passive aggression, Tina switching between fake concern and biting sarcasm. My father even left a voicemail for the first time in years, calling my actions cruel and out of character. None of them asked if I was okay. None of them even acknowledged what they'd done. I blocked them all. Phone, email, social media. One by one, I shut the doors they never thought I'd close. That weekend, I stood on my balcony, coffee in hand, watching the city churn around me. The apartment, once just a place to sleep between long hours and family emergencies, now felt like mine for the first time. No buzzing phone, no emotional ransom, just me. And in that stillness, I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was starting over. 3 weeks. That's how long it took for the silence to turn sour. At first, I thought maybe they'd finally accepted it, that I was serious, that the bank of Ethan had officially closed. I even started to believe foolishly that this might be the beginning of a more honest chapter, that maybe they'd reflect, understand, even grow. Then I got the text from Carol family meeting, tomorrow 7 p.m., don't be late. No explanation, no greeting. Just a command sent like a summons. I stared at the screen for a minute. Part of me wanted to ignore it entirely. But the quieter part, the one that had lived too long craving resolution, said, go not for them, for you. So I went. The house looked the same from the outside, tidy lawn wind chimes still hanging on the porch, but inside, the energy had shifted. Heavier, controlled. Tina and Lena were already there, perched on the couch like a jury ready to deliver a sentence. My father stood stiff near the fireplace. Carol was in the armchair, her eyes red-rimmed like she'd been crying, though I wasn't sure for whom. I didn't sit. Carol spoke first, Ethan. We don't recognize you anymore. Interesting, I said, crossing my arms. I don't think you ever did. Her face flinched, but she pushed forward. You've put this family in real trouble. Your father's working night shifts. Now I'm picking up cleaning jobs. Your sisters are struggling. I let the silence stretch before answering. You mean the same sisters who mocked me as dramatic and manipulative, who laughed when you all cut me out of the will. Daniel, my father sighed. It's not that simple. No, I said, it's really that simple. You erased me. You made it clear my worth only existed when I was paying your bills, so I stopped. Now you're angry. Not because I hurt you, but because I stopped helping you. Lena scoffed. You always make everything about money. I turned to her. You literally vandalized my apartment over money. Tina blinked. Wait, what? I raised an eyebrow. Oh, she didn't tell you. I pulled out my phone and tapped the saved security footage. The clip played clearly. Lena, in a hoodie and baseball cap, spraying industrial foam around my doorframe. Silent, efficient, and criminal. Lena's face drained of color. You said you deleted that, she hissed toward Carol. Carol's eyes widened. You did that? Daniel looked more stunned than anything, as if the very concept of consequence had never occurred to him. Yes, I said evenly. She did. I handed it to the police. Pressed charges. Tina jumped in, her voice sharp. You're seriously trying to ruin her life over a door prank? No, I replied. She tried to ruin mine. I just finally said no. The room fell into stunned silence. Then Carol, in a voice brittle with control, asked, What's it going to take to make this go away? I smiled, small and tired. $3,000 for damages. I already sent the invoice. Daniel muttered under his breath, unbelievable. What's unbelievable, I said, is how you all keep calling me selfish for doing what you would never do, draw a boundary. I turned to leave, but Carol wasn't done. If you walk out now, Ethan, don't expect us to be here when you come back. I stopped at the doorway, looked back, and said something I never thought I'd say. I don't want to come back, and I left later that night. When I got back to my apartment, I felt it before I saw it. The key jammed in the lock. The handle wouldn't budge. And when I flicked on my phone flashlight, I saw it thick gray foam sealed around the doorframe. Again. For a second, I couldn't even process it. No, not again. I took a step back. Heart thudding, the hallway was quiet. No movement. But inside me, a storm. I pulled up the building's camera feed. There she was. Lena. Same hoodie, same foam canister, same smirk. She'd done it again. This time I didn't hesitate. I called the police. When the officers arrived, I showed them the footage and gave my statement without emotion. Do you want to press charges? One of them asked. I didn't flinch, yes. They took the evidence. I filed the report. By morning, I had a case number and the beginning of legal documentation for property damage and harassment. At 11 a.m., my phone rang. Daniel. I let it ring. Tina. Voicemail. Lena. Blocked. Then Carol. I answered. You called the cops on your sister, she shouted, Ethan. What the hell is wrong with you? Nothing, I said calmly. What's wrong is that I let this go the first time. You're tearing this family apart. No, I replied. I'm just not holding it together anymore. She went silent. Then you're going to regret this. I hung up without another word. The fallout begins. By the next afternoon, $3,000 hit my bank account. A bitter note accompanied it. Hope you're happy. Don't ever speak to us again. Lena. I stared at it for a long moment, then deleted the message and felt nothing. But the damage was done on their end. Because a few hours later, I opened Facebook to a flood of comments under a long, manipulative post. Carol had gone public. She spun a story, the loving son who abandoned his aging parents and struggling sisters after years of support. She painted me as heartless, ungrateful, and money-obsessed. My name trended in the worst way possible among family friends, neighbors, and none of them knew the truth until I decided to tell it. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that silence is powerful, but only when it's a choice. When someone tries to rewrite your life story without your consent, silence becomes complicity. And I'd been silent long enough. Carol's Facebook post had spread like wildfire. Family members I hadn't heard from in years began chiming in. Uncles, cousins, even family friends who'd seen me as a quiet, responsible boy were suddenly experts on my character. How could Ethan abandon his parents when they need him most? What happened to the sweet son I knew? He used to be so generous. Generous, I was generous. Generous enough to fund an entire household. Generous enough to pick up the slack for 2 adult sisters who still treated life like a dress rehearsal for a reality show. Generous enough to sacrifice vacations, relationships, sleep, sanity for them. But to them, I was now a villain. That night, I sat in my apartment rereading her post. In the comments, like one would examine a crime scene, every word was a calculated omission. Every sentence twisted the truth into a moral weapon. And the worst part, it was working. I could have ignored it, moved on. But then I remembered the years I spent not speaking up. How many times I downplayed my exhaustion. How many people assumed I was just lucky or the stable one without knowing the cost. So I opened my laptop and I started typing my post. If my family wants to make this public, then so will I. I began with numbers. People understood numbers. 10 years of support. Over $250,000 in mortgage payments, tuition top-ups, emergency transfers, and personal loans, none of which had ever been repaid. Then I moved to receipts, literal ones. Screenshots of transfers, emails where Carol thanked me for saving the house again, texts from Tina asking for just a little help until I get back on my feet, Lena's Venmo request labeled for the IG lifestyle. I didn't just show evidence. I told the story they wouldn't. The story of being the invisible sibling who showed up every time. The son who was never applauded, only expected the man who gave everything and still got written out of the will. Not because he didn't love them, but because he refused to be used. I even included the video clip, the one of Lena vandalizing my front door again. I left out the police report number, but mentioned the charges, making it clear this wasn't a spat. It was escalation. Then I ended with this. I didn't walk away from my family. They pushed me out and expected me to fund them from the sidewalk. I stopped giving. And suddenly, I became the problem. I'm not ashamed anymore. I'm done staying silent so others can stay comfortable, Ethan. I hit post, and the ripple began. The response. It didn't take long. Within an hour, the comments started flooding in. Some people were shocked. Others apologized for judging. A few messaged privately distant cousins, old teachers, even a neighbor who remembered how often I'd be the one shoveling snow at my parents' place alone. But the most surprising reaction came from within the family. My mother called within minutes. I answered. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Her voice was low, dangerous, a whisper before the storm. Correcting the record, I said, "You're humiliating us. Your father won't leave the house." Lena hasn't stopped crying. Do you even care? I cared for 10 years, I said, and I paid dearly for it. Carol went quiet. But then, as she always did, she twisted the narrative. You're destroying this family. I laughed, once bitter. You destroyed it when you decided my value ended where my generosity did. She didn't respond, just hung up. The aftershock. In the days that followed, things got quiet. Too quiet. No more texts from Tina. No desperate voicemails from Daniel. No ranting DMs from Lena. For the first time in months, my phone was just a phone. But the silence wasn't peace. It was exile. I'd been cut off, fully, finally. My name, once the family's favorite word during tax season and emergencies, had become taboo. Even Uncle Mike, one of the few relatives who'd ever treated me with respect, reached out. Just saw your post. Proud of you, kid. But damn, that took guts. Thanks, I replied. Not sure it feels like pride. Just survival. He said something I didn't expect. It's both. Reflections. That night, I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine, watching the city unfold beneath me like a living map. I'd lost my family. Yes. But what had I really lost? A role, a routine? No, I'd lost the illusion. The illusion that they would change, or apologize, or even try to understand. And with that loss came clarity. I had time now, energy. I could pour it into my own life, instead of patching up theirs. I could sleep without dread, wake without guilt. It wasn't victory. It was peace, and sometimes peace feels like the loudest kind of revenge. The first holidays without them felt strange, like waking up in a house that's been emptied overnight. No calls, no passive-aggressive invites, no last-minute demands for money, disguised as family needs. I thought I'd feel lonely. Instead, I felt light. It's funny. You can live so long weighed down by expectations that when the weight lifts, your body doesn't quite know what to do. I spent the first weeks of winter adjusting to the quiet, learning how to enjoy my own company without the constant buzz of guilt in the background. I stopped working overtime. I started cooking real meals instead of grabbing takeout between crises. I took up running again. I started sleeping without waking at 3 a.m., wondering if I missed a "we need you" text. For the first time, I wasn't building my life around emergencies. I was just living it. Lisbon. In early spring, I booked a ticket to Lisbon. It had been years since I traveled anywhere that wasn't for a wedding, a funeral, or a guilt-tripped holiday visit. I packed light. No itinerary, no expectations. The moment I stepped into the maze of narrow sunlit streets, I knew I had made the right choice. The air smelled of sea salt and pastries. Laundry lines swayed lazily between brightly colored windows. Cafes spilled out onto the sidewalks, filled with people who didn't seem in a rush to be anywhere but here. I wandered for hours through Alfama, drank coffee so strong it could revive the dead, and listened to fado music drift from open windows. I walked along the Tagus River. At sunset, the sky bleeding pink and gold, feeling for the first time in years that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Lisbon didn't ask anything of me. It didn't demand explanations or apologies. It simply let me exist. The encounter died one late afternoon as I sat at a tiny cafe tucked between two tiled alleyways. A voice broke into my reverie. You look like someone who's finally breathing again. I looked up. She was standing there, easy smile, a weathered guidebook in one hand and a half-eaten pastel de nata in the other. Dark hair pulled into a messy bun, freckles across her nose, a presence like gravity. Her name was Isabel. She was visiting from New York, passionate about design, fascinated by old European architecture, and completely uninterested in small talk, that didn't mean something. We ended up sharing a table, and then a bottle of wine, and then 3 days exploring the city's heartbeat together. The markets, the overlooks, the quiet places tourists didn't usually find. She didn't ask about my family. I didn't ask about hers. We just existed side by side in a city big enough to hold our silence without making it awkward. With Isabel, I didn't feel like a wallet or a crutch or a disappointment. I felt seen, not for what I gave, but for who I was. Coming home, I returned to the city different, not in the grand cinematic way, but in the subtle shifting of weight you don't notice until you realize you're walking taller. I didn't unblock anyone. I didn't send a postcard. The silence remained. And I realized something important. Silence doesn't have to be loneliness. Sometimes it's just space, where you can finally hear yourself think. The update. A few months later, Uncle Mike messaged again. Carol had taken on more cleaning jobs. Daniel was still working nights at the warehouse. Tina had lost another job. Lena's influencer dreams had sputtered into a collection of unpaid sponsorship posts. Then GoFundMe, please. They were struggling. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel pity either. I felt detached. Because their struggle wasn't my responsibility anymore. They had made their choices, and so had I. The first new holiday that December, I hosted a small gathering in my apartment. Uncle Mike came bringing his famous bourbon pecan pie and a 6-pack of cheap beer he swore was better than it looked. A few friends from work showed up. Isabel, who had extended her stay in Europe, sent a postcard that simply read, "Keep breathing." There was no drama, no guilt-trip toasts, no fights about money, just music, laughter, the clink of glasses, and a sense of something I hadn't felt in a long time, belonging. Not because of blood, but because of choice. The quiet victory. That night, standing on my balcony, watching the city lights shimmer against the dark, I realized something. I hadn't abandoned my family. I had simply stopped bleeding for people who didn't even notice when I was wounded. Family isn't who demands from you. Family is who stands with you, even when you have nothing left to give. Carol once said, "Family supports each other." I agreed. They just weren't mine. Not anymore. And maybe they never really were. I took a deep breath, feeling the cold night air fill my lungs, the city sprawling out before me, full of possibility. I wasn't waiting for their apology anymore. I wasn't waiting for their recognition. I wasn't waiting at all. This was my life now. Finally mine. And that was the most profound kind of freedom I could ever ask for. Story 2. Growing up, my brother and I were never close. I'm Adam, 29M, and my brother Mark, 26M, was always the golden child. He could do no wrong in my parents' eyes, while I became an afterthought the minute he was born. Still, I never imagined that someday I'd have to choose between my girlfriend's safety and my own family. It all started 6 months ago when I introduced my girlfriend Laura, 26F, to my family at my cousin's wedding. Laura is a pediatric nurse, smart, compassionate, and way out of my league. Honestly, we'd been dating for nearly a year and things had been perfect. I was nervous about bringing her around my family because I'd told her everything about them, the favoritism, the manipulation, and most importantly, Mark's tendency to ruin anything good in my life. But Laura, always the optimist, thought maybe things could be different. Maybe adulthood had mellowed him out. Maybe with boundaries, we could have a normal relationship. It took about 5 minutes to prove her wrong. The moment we arrived at the wedding venue, Mark made a beeline for Laura. He practically shoved my mom aside, just to be the first to hug her, holding on far too long. Laura smiled politely, but I could tell she was already uncomfortable. Dinner was worse. Mark kept touching her arm and shoulder under the guise of friendly gestures. He invented fake inside jokes, tried to feed her off his fork, and even pushed past me multiple times just to sit next to her. Laura, bless her heart, stayed polite, wanting to make a good impression. But her discomfort was obvious to anyone paying attention, which meant no one in my family noticed or cared. To make matters worse, Mark spent the evening telling fabricated stories about my childhood, painting me as unstable and cruel. He even spun a wild tale about how he saved an ex-girlfriend of mine from emotional abuse. A story so detached from reality, That Laura had to force herself not to laugh. She knew the truth. I told her everything about my awkward, lonely teenage years. Through it all, my parents just smiled along, nodding as if Mark's stories were gospel. After dinner, Laura tried to help clean up, and I went to the garage with my dad to move some boxes. 15 minutes later, I realized Laura hadn't come back. I found her in the kitchen cornered. Mark had her trapped against the counter, one hand braced on the surface beside her hip, standing way too close. He was telling her she deserved someone more exciting than boring old Adam. When Laura saw me, she practically sprinted to my side. Mark just laughed like it was a harmless joke. I wanted to punch him then and there, but I didn't. Not yet. Laura and I left early. The drive back to her place was silent until she finally broke down crying. She hadn't wanted to cause a scene, but now she felt trapped, terrified of what Mark might do next. I promised her I'd handle it. For a few days, things seemed quiet. Then the calls and texts started. At first, it was just random numbers, heavy breathing hang-ups. Then voicemails, nasty ones calling Laura stuck up and frigid for rejecting someone better. Some messages even mentioned her hospital shifts and what she'd worn that day. Someone was watching her. Laura didn't recognize the voices, but I did. They were Mark's old high school friends, losers who still followed him around because my parents paid them under the table through the family business. When Laura blocked the numbers, they just called from new ones. When she changed her number, they started showing up at her work, hanging around the pediatric wing, pretending to visit non-existent patients. One night, after a late shift, one of them followed her to her car. Laura called me sobbing, too afraid to drive home. I picked her up, and a buddy of mine drove her car back while we checked for tails. Laura started having panic attacks before work. She stopped sleeping. She lost weight. I watched helplessly as the best person I'd ever met was slowly crushed by the people who should have been protecting her. I had enough. I gathered every piece of evidence, recordings, voicemails, security footage from the hospital, even statements from Laura's co-workers, and went straight to my parents' house. Mark was home, lounging in the living room like he didn't have a care in the world. I played the evidence in front of him. He didn't even flinch. When I finished, he just smirked and said, "Maybe if Laura wasn't such a tease, people wouldn't have to teach her a lesson." I don't even remember swinging. One second he was grinning, the next he was on the floor clutching his nose. My parents came running, shouting at me like I'd committed murder. They didn't even ask what had happened. They didn't look at the evidence. They didn't care. My mom clutched Mark like he was a wounded puppy. My dad roared at me about my anger issues. When I tried to explain about the harassment, my mom sneered that Laura led Mark on and was now playing the victim. Dad told me to get out and not come back until I apologized. I didn't say a word. I just walked away. Laura and I have been staying at her apartment ever since. She's terrified to go to work, afraid every time a strange car parks outside. Her supervisor is sympathetic, but pressure is mounting. Rumors have started swirling about drama in her department. Meanwhile, my parents act like we're the villains. The police won't do anything without direct proof linking Mark to the harassment. I'm at my wit's end. Laura deserves so much better than this. I'm doing everything I can to protect her. But when your own family becomes the enemy, where do you even start? Things didn't get better after we cut contact. If anything, they got worse. A few days after the fight at my parents' house, Laura started getting new calls, this time from numbers that couldn't be traced back. Same heavy breathing, same disgusting messages, same threats veiled just enough to avoid breaking any obvious laws. We documented everything. Screenshots, recordings, statements from her co-workers, footage from the hospital showing Mark's friends lurking around the pediatric wing for hours. Finally, we went to the police. The first officer we spoke to seemed concerned until we mentioned the names of the guys involved. Turns out Mark's best friend Jason is the son of a local police sergeant. Suddenly, the tone shifted. Maybe it was all a misunderstanding. Maybe Laura was misinterpreting friendly attention. Maybe we were being overly sensitive. They said they could issue warnings, but unless we had direct proof that Mark was orchestrating it all, there wasn't much they could do. It felt like being punched in the gut all over again. My parents' reaction was even worse. Apparently, Mark had gone home crying about how I'd attacked him for no reason. Mom called me in hysterics, sobbing that I was out of control and ruining the family. Dad left me a voicemail, saying if I didn't apologize, I could kiss my inheritance goodbye. As if I cared. I had my own job in software development, my own apartment, and my own life, none of which depended on them. They still didn't get it. They didn't want peace, they wanted obedience. A week later, my mom called again, voice dripping with sugary concern. She said Mark was sorry, that he'd been going through a rough time and wanted to apologize, that they wanted to have a family dinner to work things out. Like adults. Laura and I talked it over for hours. Against my better judgment, we decided to give them one last chance, maybe, just maybe if they saw the evidence and heard us out. They'd finally realize how serious this was. We agreed to meet at my parents' house on a Sunday evening. Walking up the driveway, I felt Laura tense beside me. I squeezed her hand. "We'll be in and out," I promised. I should have trusted my gut. The second we walked through the door, I knew it was a setup. The living room was full. Not just my parents and Mark, but my Aunt Janet, Uncle Rick, and worst of all, Jason and two of the other guys who'd been stalking Laura at the hospital. It wasn't a dinner. It was an ambush. They called it an intervention. For 2 hours, they took turns attacking Laura's character. Mom said Laura had obviously led Mark on at the wedding, flirting and sending mixed signals. Aunt Janet chimed in that working in pediatrics must be stressful, and maybe Laura's emotions were getting the better of her. Jason, the sergeant's son, smugly explained that he and his friends were only ever at the hospital because they were visiting relatives, not because they were stalking anyone. When Laura calmly tried to show them the screenshots and messages again, they talked over her, twisting every fact. When she explained how scared she was, they smiled condescendingly, suggesting therapy might help her work through her insecurities. The worst moment came when Jason casually described in detail what Laura had been wearing at work on specific days, proving he'd been watching her for weeks, and instead of being horrified, my mom acted like it was proof Laura had been seeking attention. Laura couldn't take it anymore. She excused herself to the bathroom, clearly struggling to breathe. I started to follow her, but Mom grabbed my arm, and that's when she said it. "It's time you chose, Adam, your real family or some unstable girl trying to destroy us." I didn't hesitate. "I choose Laura." And we left. Laura was shaking all the way home, not just because of what they said, but because of how casual it all was, how easily a room full of adults had decided to protect a predator and destroy the victim. The next day, the harassment escalated. Now Mark's friends were spreading rumors at Laura's hospital that she was mentally unstable, that she had a history of false accusations. It was subtle enough to avoid HR action, but loud enough to hurt her reputation. Laura's supervisor, who had been sympathetic, called her in for a meeting. He warned that all the drama was starting to affect the pediatric ward's morale and suggested maybe she should transfer to another department or another hospital altogether. Laura left that meeting in tears. That night, sitting on the kitchen floor, she whispered, "I don't feel safe here anymore." Neither did I. We hired a lawyer the next day. Restraining orders, formal complaints to the hospital, petitions to move Laura to a different hospital 3 hours away. It felt like admitting defeat, like we were letting them win. But it wasn't about winning anymore. It was about survival. I hated it. I hated that Mark still lived at home like nothing happened. I hated that my parents kept posting on Facebook about family unity and forgiveness, while letting their son stalk and harass an innocent woman. I hated that the police, the hospital, even our community seemed more interested in looking away than facing the truth. But I hated most of all the look on Laura's face, the look of someone slowly being broken down by a war she never asked for. Around this time, my cousin Kate reached out. Kate and I had always been close growing up, though we drifted apart during college. She'd heard about the rumors, and more importantly, she believed us. "I'm getting married next month," she said. "I want you and Laura there. And don't worry, Mark's invited because my parents insisted, but I've got extra security. He's not going to ruin this." Laura was hesitant. The idea of being anywhere near Mark made her sick. But Kate was one of the few family members who had our back. We decided to go. One more night, we told ourselves, One more test of whether we could still have some shred of normalcy. We had no idea just how wrong things were about to go. The day of Kate's wedding started out almost normal. For the first time in weeks, Laura smiled without forcing it. She wore a simple navy dress that made her eyes stand out. And for a few hours, I let myself believe we could just be two guests at a celebration. Nothing more. Kate had kept her word. Extra security assigned seating across the room from Mark and my parents. Plenty of people around who actually supported us. For a while it worked. Laura and I stuck close to Kate's husband's family, people Mark barely knew. We ate. We danced a little. We even laughed. Laura was starting to relax. I should have known it wouldn't last. Around 9 p.m., Laura got up to use the restroom. She was gone maybe 10 minutes when I realized something was wrong. I glanced at the family table. Mark wasn't there. Something cold settled in my chest. Without even thinking, I started moving. As I rounded the corner toward the bathrooms, I heard it. Laura's scream. I sprinted. Kate's husband, Ryan, and his brother, who's a cop, were already ahead of me. They found them first. Mark had Laura pinned against the wall outside the bathrooms. One hand was over her mouth. The other was gripping her wrist so hard, bruises were already forming. Laura was struggling, kicking, trying to break free. Ryan and his brother yanked Mark off her just as I got there. Laura ran to me sobbing. Her dress was torn at the shoulder. Her arms were red where Mark had grabbed her. Mark was drunk out of his mind, slurring, shouting about how Laura had been teasing him all night. He kept trying to twist the story, even as security pinned him to the ground. Ryan's brother called the police immediately. Laura was shaking so hard, I thought she might collapse. Kate's mom pulled her into a side room while Ryan and I stood watch outside. When the police arrived, things got even uglier. My mom tried to block the officers from reaching Mark, screaming about how it was all a misunderstanding. My dad actually grabbed one of the cops' arms, yelling that they couldn't arrest his son for one mistake. Meanwhile, Mark was alternating between sobbing and screaming threats at everyone around him. It took 4 officers to finally get him cuffed and into the squad car. And as they shoved him inside, he turned and shouted at Laura loud enough for half the reception to hear. "You know you wanted it, you little..." I won't finish the sentence. You can guess. Half the guests had their phones out recording by then. The evidence wasn't going anywhere. The fallout. Within hours, the story spread through the family. Everyone who had witnessed the assault or seen Mark's meltdown knew the truth. Everyone else got the official version from my parents. Laura had lured Mark into a secluded hallway. She had seduced him, and when he rejected her, she cried assault. They even accused Ryan and his brother of roughing Mark up before the cops arrived. It was pure insanity. Fortunately, the security footage from the venue, the wedding photographer's video, and multiple guest videos told the real story. Mark wasn't the victim. Laura was. We pressed charges. Our lawyer pulled no punches. Battery, attempted sexual assault. Harassment. Witness intimidation. Between the physical evidence, Laura's injuries, and dozens of witness statements, Mark didn't stand a chance. He eventually took a plea deal. 8 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 5. My parents' reaction. You'd think seeing their son arrested would have been a wake-up call. It wasn't. They doubled down. They called everyone in the family, spinning the same tired narrative. They called Laura a liar, a manipulator, a gold digger. They showed up at my apartment, banging on the door, screaming that I was betraying the family. At one point, my dad threatened to sue me for defamation for telling lies about Mark. I didn't answer the door. I didn't answer their calls. I didn't respond to their texts. I was done. The move. Laura and I knew we couldn't stay. Even with Mark locked up, the town was poisoned. Rumors spread. Sideways glances followed us everywhere. Laura's hospital was sympathetic at first, but eventually suggested she start fresh somewhere else. So we left. Laura got an offer at a hospital 3 states away. I moved my software job fully remote. We packed our lives into a U-Haul and drove through the night, leaving behind the place that had never really been home. The new life. It's been almost 3 years now. Laura's thriving. She was promoted to head nurse last fall. We bought a small house, nothing fancy, but it's ours. Last summer, we got married. A tiny ceremony by a lake. No family from my side was invited, except for Kate. She cried harder than anyone. A few months ago, we found out we're expecting our first child, a little girl. Sometimes I sit on the porch watching Laura laugh with our dog, and I think about how close I came to losing all of this. Not because of Mark, but because of the lies. I was raised on the belief that blood mattered more than respect, that family loyalty meant tolerating abuse. I know better now. Family isn't who shares your DNA. Family is who shows up when you need them, who believes you, who protects you, even when it's hard. Laura's my family now. Kate is my family. Our daughter will grow up knowing she's loved for who she is not, for how much she sacrifices. One last thing. Last week, I got a letter from my mom. 12 pages handwritten, apologies, excuses, tears on paper. She said she finally saw the truth about Mark, that maybe if they'd gotten him help sooner, things would have been different. Maybe. I don't know if I'll ever write her back. Some wounds don't heal just because someone says sorry. Sometimes survival means moving forward without looking back. And for the first time in my life, I'm not afraid to leave them behind. Story 3. Eric and I met about 9 years ago during a freak ice storm. We were stranded at a small-town coffee shop for hours after the road shut down, ended up playing cards with some locals, swapping stories, and by the time the roads cleared, we had each other's numbers. It sounds cheesy, but he made me laugh during one of the worst storms I've ever seen. We started dating a few weeks later, married 2 years after that. We have a daughter together, Mia 6F, and she's basically sunshine in human form. She's all energy dancing, running, climbing, anything she can. Every room she enters, she turns into a playground. It was actually Mia who kicked off the first crack in our so-called perfect life. About 6 months ago, she came home from school raving about her friend Sophia, taking ballet classes. All Mia could talk about was wearing real ballet shoes and twirling in a tutu. It sounded perfect. Mia had energy to burn and dance, seemed like a great outlet. I was excited. When I brought it up to Eric that night, though his reaction blindsided me, he didn't even look up from his phone, just snorted and said we couldn't afford luxuries like dance classes if I wasn't pulling my weight financially. I felt punched in the gut. I'd switched to part-time work after Mia was born, something we both agreed on. It let me actually be there for her during those early years. We weren't rich, but we weren't struggling. House was paid down, cars were old but reliable. We weren't taking European vacations, but we could manage $60 a month for dance, right? Apparently not, according to Eric. He pulled up our bank app and showed me numbers that made my stomach twist, barely any breathing room after bills. I couldn't figure out why. But I wasn't in a position to argue without sounding like I was accusing him of something. Eric's always handled our finances. He's better with numbers, he said. So guilt gnawing at me, I agreed to pick up a second job. I found an evening shift at a 24-hour diner a few blocks away. The schedule was brutal. I worked my regular day job until mid-afternoon, rushed home to help with homework and dinner, then left again for the diner 4 nights a week. I came home every night reeking of fryer oil, feet aching, too exhausted to even shower some nights. When I mentioned how wiped I felt, Eric laughed this cold, mean laugh and said, "You don't deserve to be tired. You barely contribute." I swallowed that hurt like it was normal, because this was for Mia, right? Except 3 months into busting my body and soul at 2 jobs, Mia still wasn't in dance class. Every time I brought it up, Eric had an excuse. The class was full. We should wait until a new session. We needed to get caught up financially first. Meanwhile, I noticed other little things. Mia started talking about trips to the zoo on nights I was working. Trips Eric never mentioned. She came home with new toys, new clothes. She talked about a woman named Bree, who was Daddy's friend, and took better pictures than Mommy. Alarm bells started ringing hard. When I asked Eric casually about Bree, he brushed it off. "She's just a coworker. She's going through a tough divorce. It's nothing." I wanted to believe him. But things kept piling up. Mia started calling me ha-ha sometimes instead of Mommy, because apparently Bree called me that as a joke. The day Mia asked if Bree could come to my birthday party was the day I knew. I started checking. Eric's social media looked clean. No suspicious posts, no pictures. But then Mia would let little things slip, mentions of Bree making pancakes at a different house, a pool she swam in that we didn't have. The clincher came when I came home early one night because my diner shift was dead. The house was empty. Eric's car was gone. He texted an hour later, saying they were getting ice cream. When they finally got home, Mia spilled everything, talking a mile a minute about a movie they'd just seen with Bree. When I confronted Eric, he turned it around on me, cold as ice, and said, "Maybe if you were more fun, she'd still call you Mommy." I didn't yell, I didn't cry. I just stared at him, realizing that something inside me had broken for good. That was 5 months ago. Since then, I've been quietly watching Saving Gathering. Mia deserves better. And I'm not letting Eric or Bree steal one more thing from us. After that night, everything shifted. I stopped asking Eric questions, stopped pushing. I just paid attention. If he thought he was winning, keeping me too busy, too tired, too distracted, he was wrong. I moved in silence. First thing I did was get access to our bank account. Eric set it up years ago, claimed it was easier if he handled the finances. Turns out I didn't even have the login anymore. The password I thought we shared didn't work. When I asked casually if we could sit down and go over bills together, he got defensive, said he was too busy with work. That was enough for me. The next day during my lunch break, I went straight to our bank branch. Showed them my ID, explained I was a joint account holder. The teller was polite, but cautious, probably used to situations like this. When she handed me the printed statements, I sat down at a corner table and started flipping through them. It felt like getting punched in the chest over and over again. For the last 18 months, Eric had been quietly draining money into a separate account, small transfers, $300 here, $500 there. Regular as clockwork, add it all up. Over $20,000, then $20,000. Meanwhile, I was busting my back at a diner, skipping meals, missing bedtime stories with Mia, all because we supposedly couldn't afford dance classes. And that wasn't even the worst of it. I saw restaurant charges, fancy places we'd never been to together, hotel stays a few towns over, jewelry store receipts. Plane tickets booked under 2 names, Eric and Bree. I wasn't angry. Not at first. It was weirder than that. I felt empty, numb. Like I'd been living in someone else's dream, and now I was waking up. I started checking everything. Went through his desk drawers when he was at work. Opened every envelope, every file. Found a property tax bill tucked under some old car insurance papers. A condo downtown under Eric's name only. Bought about a year ago, right around when he told me we needed to tighten our belts. Guess where Mia stays sometimes when Daddy and Bree have her for the night. Not Bree's house. Their house. A separate life. Set up behind my back. It was all right there. Plain as day. While I worked 2 jobs, Eric built a cozy little second family. A condo, dinners out, weekend getaways, all funded by side gigs he never told me about. Extra contracts through his work, funneled straight into his secret accounts. Meanwhile, I was clocking hours at the diner, dragging myself through 12-hour days, missing Mia's first cartwheel, missing bedtime stories. All because he needed me exhausted and out of the way. The anger didn't come all at once. It built slowly, layer by layer, like bricks in a wall. By the time I finished gathering all the evidence, photos, bank statements, property records, I didn't even recognize the woman I used to be. The woman who swallowed insults, who accepted, "You don't deserve to be tired," as normal. Who worked herself half to death because she thought maybe she just wasn't doing enough. She was gone. I opened a new bank account that same afternoon, started quietly moving small deposits over cash from diner tips, mostly enough to build a safety net without Eric noticing. Asked my mom to hold on to backup copies of everything. Told her we were having some issues, but didn't go into full detail yet. I wasn't ready. Not until I had a plan. Meanwhile, I focused on Mia. I switched my diner shifts to early mornings whenever I could, made it my mission to be home for bedtime, signed Mia up for ballet without telling Eric, paid for 3 months up front with my own money. The look on her face when I told her, I could have lived on that joy alone for the rest of my life. Mia spun around the living room in her new leotard, squealing, "Mommy, I'm a real ballerina." For the first time in months, she called me Mommy again. Not haha, not Hannah, just Mommy. It broke something inside me and healed it at the same time. Eric didn't say much about the dance classes, just frowned when he saw the bag of new ballet shoes, muttered something about wasting money. I didn't argue, just smiled and said, "It's already paid for." Every night after Mia went to sleep, I dug deeper. Found Bree's social media accounts private, But the profile pictures matched the woman in the photos Mia hid in her dresser. Found public records tying Eric to that condo. Found more plane tickets, more hotel stays. Piece by piece, the puzzle completed itself. A week ago, I met with a lawyer. Laid everything out on the table. She barely blinked as I explained, just took notes, asked clarifying questions. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and asked, "What do you want, Hannah?" I didn't hesitate. "I want my daughter. I want my freedom. I want my life back." She smiled. "We can make that happen." The final crack came faster than I thought. Eric's parents' anniversary party was scheduled for Saturday afternoon, a big family event. Dozens of relatives. The perfect opportunity to reveal everything. I didn't plan to make a scene. Honestly, I didn't even want to go. But after what Eric had done, after what he was still doing, I needed witnesses. I needed the truth to come out somewhere. He couldn't twist it into more lies. The morning of the party, I packed Mia's things quietly, got myself ready. Put my evidence folder in the bottom of my bag. Eric was acting weird all morning, too cheerful, too attentive, like he was trying to read me without being obvious. He asked 3 separate times if I was excited to finally relax and be a family again. Each time I smiled and said yes. Each time I felt myself getting calmer, not angry anymore, just ready. When we pulled up to his parents' house, Eric practically sprinted to open my car door, made a show of grabbing Mia's hand and swinging her up onto his shoulders, trying to play the perfect family man. Inside, it was the usual chaos, relatives laughing, kids running around, folding tables loaded with food. Eric's mom greeted us with tight hugs. Eric's dad clapped him on the back, told him how proud he was. I just smiled, biting my tongue so hard I could taste blood. It didn't take long. Maybe half an hour after lunch, the doorbell rang. I was standing by the kitchen island when it happened. Eric froze mid-sentence. His whole face changed. Bree had arrived. She walked in like she belonged, gift bag in hand, smile so wide it looked glued on. I watched Eric's mother blink in confusion, watched his sister's mouth fall open. Bree clocked me standing there immediately. She faltered, her smile twitching. Eric rushed to her side, whispering urgently, but it was too late. The room went quiet. Someone turned the music down. Every pair of eyes swung between me, Eric, and Bree. I stepped forward, pulled the folder from my bag, handed it to Eric's mother. "I thought you should see this," I said, my voice steady. She opened it right there at the kitchen island, page after page, bank statements showing hidden transfers, hotel receipts, plane tickets, pictures of Eric and Bree with Mia, copies of the condo purchase. You could feel the air leave the room. Eric tried to talk, stumbled over his words, making excuses no one believed. His father flipped through the folder, getting redder by the second. His mother looked like she might be sick. Bree tried to quietly back out of the house, but Eric's sister blocked her at the door. "You're not going anywhere," she said. The explosion was ugly. Eric's father demanded answers. Eric stammered through some pathetic lie about us being separated already. I laughed an ugly broken sound and said, "Funny must have slipped my mind while I was paying half the mortgage and working 2 jobs to keep this family afloat." Eric's mom asked Bree if she knew he was still married. Bree said Eric told her we were basically over and just co-parenting for Mia. Eric's dad cut in then, cold and final. If that's true, why was Hannah still paying all the bills? No answer. Bree finally snapped, grabbed her bag and fled. Eric stood there alone, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. I didn't stay much longer. I gathered Mia, who thankfully had been outside playing the whole time, and told Eric's parents quietly that I would not be returning. His mom hugged me, tight, wordless. His dad shook my hand without speaking. As I buckled Mia into the car seat, I caught Eric watching us through the living room window. He didn't try to stop me. He knew it was over. The days that followed were messy. Eric moved into the condo full-time. I filed for divorce 2 days after the party. Full custody, child support, asset division. He tried to fight. At first claimed he deserved joint custody, that I was being vindictive. My lawyer shut it down hard. We had evidence of financial misconduct, evidence of emotional manipulation, evidence that he'd endangered Mia's emotional well-being by dragging her into his secret life. It wasn't even a close call. It's been about 6 months now. Mia and I moved into a small duplex on the edge of town. It's not fancy, it's not big, but it's ours. No secrets hidden in drawers. No whispered phone calls behind locked doors. Just me, my daughter, and a peace I didn't realize I was starving for. Eric still tries sometimes, little texts, weak apologies. Can we talk? I miss my family. I made mistakes, but you're being unfair. I don't answer anymore. Not because I'm angry, though. Sometimes I am. Not because I want revenge. Because he had every chance, and he chose someone else, over and over again. Last week, Mia had her first recital. She twirled onto the stage in her pink tutu beaming, waving at me in the crowd. When the music started, she danced her little heart out. When it ended, she ran straight into my arms. You saw me, Mommy, you saw. I held her so tight I thought I might break. I see you, baby. I whispered into her hair. I always will.